Let me get myself together, okay? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. There's a lot going on, everybody. Let's talk about public education, the state of education. Do we have a right to read? Do we have a right to an education? Not just our children, but our adult population who need to be re-educated. If you lose a job, if you want to make a career change, do you have the right? Do you have the opportunity to be able to do that? It's a very interesting thing that happened to me when I was a young girl, when I was 14 and 15, because I had my 15th birthday overseas. Very different of my family. Lived, well, he didn't live, but he was working in Denmark because he was a world renowned research chemist and research scientist and a teacher. In fact, my parents met him down at North Carolina A&T State University, where he had been teaching, but he had gone on to world renown. And he invited me to join his family for the summer. So I was there for several months, and I learned a lot looking back. I learned a lot. My parents told me to keep my eyes and ears open, Dr. Sonia Whitaker, because they said you're going to see a lot. And my parents were the kind of parents, and they still are, where they shared things with us. They didn't have a lot of money, but what they did have was what we did. We did have a rich life because we met a lot of people and saw a lot of things. And one of the things that I saw was the educational opportunities that people had in Scandinavia, and really that were taken as givens in Europe. Um, Health care. That was something, just as a non-citizen, if I got sick over there, you go to the hospital or a doctor would come to you. That wasn't really unusual because I lived in a neighborhood filled with a lot of doctors, but I understood that it was very unusual just in terms of the access. But what about the access to an education? My sister Jackie she's teaching over in Japan right now, and she has her PhD in global education policy. And one of the things that really struck her, because she spent a lot of time as a consequence out of the country studying different systems. And she said, you turn on the radio in throughout Scandinavia. I said, yep, and you can learn other languages. She said, oh yeah, how did you know? I said, because I lived there for a minute, like 3 or 4 months. If you want to learn French, you turn on the radio. If you want to learn English, you want to learn a multitude of languages. I mean, they have a real mission to educate their populace. But do we do that in the United States? No. You had some public school students in Detroit several years ago, certainly this happened within the past 10 years, who sued the public school system of Detroit because they said, you did not teach me to read. I went to college and I found out, and I graduated at the top of my class, I found out that I was illiterate. We're seeing that with wide swaths of our children in Baltimore and throughout the country. Why? At the same time, we're watching the Department of Education under direct threat. When my brother, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., was in Congress, he created an amendment to the Constitution because as he read the Constitution, and he's a trained lawyer, he said, look, we do not have an explicit right to vote, and we don't have a right to an education. Oh, you might think you have the right to public education. No, 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 no. That's not written anywhere. And just out of a sense of noblesse oblige, Benjamin Franklin created our public libraries. That was not a given. So let's talk about this, everybody. Is there anybody who can teach me to read? Is there anyone who can teach me how to read? Does anyone want to?
Wow.
Yeah. So what do we bring to you this former superintendent, deputy superintendent, teacher? She is one of the directors of Push Excel. She never stops educating, never stops reaching out, trying to find ways to educate our children. You and Dr. Malvo, we were on the radio yesterday talking about what we can do on Saturdays to teach our children history. And not just that history, we do need to have sewing clubs. We do need to cook. When you look at all of the money that Martha Stewart is making, they're making our recipes.
Mhm.
We need to know that Jackie Kennedy's gown, wedding gown, was designed and crafted by a black woman by the name of Anne Lowe, who had to remake the gown really hours, tens of hours before the wedding because there was a flood in her studio. She was the couturier to the stars and to all of the socialites. We don't know that. These are things that we need to know. But if we don't have an education system that trains us vocationally and academically, where will we be? So, Dr. Whitaker, I open it up to you because now we have Linda McMahon, who is very wealthy.
Right.
She and her husband created this wrestling dynasty. And so they're very successful business people. But she's not an educator, and she's overseeing a department that they're trying to dismantle. So you need to explain this to me. I've given you a lot of runway, personal anecdotes, and all of that, just because, these are some of the things that I've seen. But you've seen a lot because you've taught in wealthy communities, but you have purposefully directed your career to communities where people are poor. So wait a minute. So before I even get to the Department of Education, why don't you explain why you have done that? Why you have chosen to focus your energies and your career in poor communities? Because given your credentials, you could go to a wealthy community because that's they would want you there, and you could coast because that's the way this works, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, do you tell me?
I appreciate that. Nobody's ever asked me that question. Yes, I was intentional about wanting to go and lead in a school district and in areas serving majority minority students and majority students that are impacted by poverty. And I did so deliberately, Santita, and to your listening audience, after working in some of the most affluent school districts in our nation. And the reason why I did it in that order is because I wanted to make sure that I was clear about the difference between the academic experiences had between students who qualify for free and reduced lunch and their peers, sometime in the same state, sometime just across one block or two, the difference in their academic experiences, and probably even more specifically, the differences in the types of resources that they have access to. And so yes, I'm a living witness to the fact that there are differences, stark differences in the types of experiences that students have in districts where the tax base and the community is more affluent than poor. And I was able to see those and then began to advocate the power. I think that school districts serving majority minority students have had in having me is that I knew what they were supposed to have. That's the other thing. It's
You have,
okay.
wait a minute,
That's
that's
right.
key, right?
That
That
right
you
there.
that okay.
Yeah, I knew because there are, with all due respect, there are teachers and administrators who are working super hard, but they've only been in their system. So they've only taught, and let's do the leadership piece. They've only led in a system where they had minimal resources. So they don't know what the best resources actually look like. They don't know the presidents of the textbook companies who can tell you what's coming down the pipe and what your students should have access to. So I have been able to really advocate and fight for the level of high quality resources and experiences that Black and Brown children could have in summary, because I know what it looks like.
Well, and that to me is key because um, I remember when they opened Whitney Young Magnet High School here in Chicago. Everybody, that was at the time the most elite public school in the city, and it is the school. It is the model for the other magnet schools that came after it, right, Dr. Whitaker?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it was a standalone for about 8 or 9 years. It was the only school that was by mandate, by city mandate, completely desegregated. It had to reflect the city population, which for the city that is, according to the Justice Department, the most segregated city in the country,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big deal. But what we saw them do, and of course I didn't realize it at the time, they pulled the top performing teachers from all the schools from all over town.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a state of the art facility, and this is for a public school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what you're telling me is that you see, well, as just as Reverend Jesse Jackson used to take us to two different high schools in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, a poor school that did not even, or should I say, a school in a an under resourced school in an under resourced neighborhood. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They didn't even have a pool. They had a pool, but they didn't have water in it.
And Santita, can I give you
Right?
a concrete
And,
example of
and
that
then he
though?
took them to a wealthy neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
where they saw computers, a computer lab, and nobody could be without access to a computer.
I'll give you a concrete example of that. From my first superintendency, I left a position in the north suburbs of Illinois that was so wealthy at the time that this was long before COVID. I'm talking 15 years ago. We
Mhm.
were giving, and 15,000 students, we were giving black leather book bags and wireless laptop Apple computers to every student in the district on the first day. Okay.
Say that one more time.
Then
No, no,
I
I
said,
say that
okay.
one more time.
I was in a position in the northwest suburbs of Illinois where on the first day of school we were giving out wireless Apple laptop computers 15 years ago and black leather book bags. 1 year, just 12 months later, I took on my first superintendent job serving majority black students. And the first day that I was in that system, I asked, why are all the children walking in the street? And I looked to my left and right, Santita, and I noticed they didn't even have a sidewalk. My children, at my first superintendency,
Unbelievable.
they didn't, the kindergarten students didn't even have a playground. This is me, Sonia Whitaker, leaving one of the most affluent districts in the state of Illinois to take the helm and lead in the school system that needed me most. And my children were walking to street. And when they got to school, they didn't go outside for recess because they didn't have as much as a swing set. This
So
is
what?
what I
Okay,
saw.
okay. And so when they talk, so when you hear people lament the president, and you hear this quite frankly on the right and the left, but it's really become a talking point of the right. But it's becoming a talking point on the left also.
Hmm.
Public education doesn't work. It's collapsed. I said no, it's being collapsed.
Ah, that part. That's
Okay,
it. That's it.
because it's shocking to me because this is a public school that you were referring to, yes,
It was. It
and they
is.
got Apple. I mean, this is nearly $1 trillion company. Because
Yes.
see, to me, they could do this all over the country. Because
Hmm.
I think that the internet should be a public utility.
Of
And
course.
we saw during COVID for these kids to have to maybe sit outside of their school in the cold to try
Hmm.
if they had a computer.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
how are you going to do remote learning if you don't have a computer?
And
Now,
so that's why I really reject, and I know this could be controversial, but I reject the use of the term that schools are failing children.
okay.
Our school society is failing children. Communities, lack of resources to communities are failing children. The school itself doesn't fail children. If my children come to school and they haven't had breakfast, and
Mm.
then they had to walk in the middle of the street in the cold because the township doesn't have a sidewalk, and you hold my system accountable for ensuring that children achieve at the same level, if not higher, than their peers, I have a problem with that.
Well, I mean, and when you talk about creating safe passage for these kids and all of that, being in those environments, it's depressing.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
presses you down.
Mm-hmm.
Children are supposed to be able to play, Dr. Whitaker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to have swings. I mean,
Right.
because it playing on the playground teaches them. Because I remember when I was in school, you got graded on your conduct.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
important part of being in school, which is why
Mm-hmm.
being at home during COVID was so damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
socially, it harmed our children,
Mm-hmm.
and it bothers me because I know kids who were in private schools. I know kids who were in prep schools who kept going to school during
Mm-hmm.
COVID.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, my niece didn't come home until May,
Mm-hmm.
and she did the last month remotely. I said, well, wait a minute. Everybody is not has not been cut off from their people. Some people have
Right.
continued to go to school, and when you went out to these wealthy areas, they kept going to school, Dr. Whitaker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, which brings us to where we are with education, because
Mm-hmm.
public education is being shredded right before our very eyes. Or is that
It is.
an exaggeration?
No, I think that would be accurate, and I would suggest that it is a deliberate attempt to ensure that the marginalized remain marginalized and that the vulnerable remain vulnerable. You asked the question a moment ago that I thought was pretty profound, and that is, does anybody want us to learn how to read? When the
Well, I want
US
everyone to know this is your book. Is there anybody who can teach me how to read? I think you got another one. Come on, put it up here. Bring it closer.
I don't
Bring
think
it
you've seen
closer.
it. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the question is, I'm like, yeah, is there anyone here who can? Because we know that in the poorer schools, they send teachers, some teachers who are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't dare send teachers. They send hyper qualified teachers into certain school districts.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is not equal.
Right. And now with the
Whitaker?
national teacher shortage, there's another way that they're doing it. And now with the national teacher shortage, what you'll find in school districts where there may be a population of affluent students or white students, and then a population of black students in another school, what you'll find is that the substitute teachers are being summoned off. And as much as we appreciate and need them, the reality is that there is an unequal distribution of talent in those systems, meaning the certified, highly qualified teachers are finding themselves being staffed into the schools that are serving the majority of fluent students, and the substitute teachers are finding themselves being staffed in schools serving majority students. Santita Jackson, nobody's talking about this publicly. And so, even within one school district, I'm finding that they're creating their own form of de facto segregation as a direct result of the national teacher crisis.
No one's talking about that though at
No, they're
all.
not talking about that.
So is it being documented?
It's not, it's actually, and this is public information. Parents and communities have the right to say, is my child being taught by a certified classroom teacher? I paused, Santita Jackson, because you're onto something. We just gave them a tool
Mhm.
that's not out there, that people are again talking about. They have the right to know what percentage of the teaching staff in my child's school is certified teacher versus what percentage of this teaching staff is substitute teachers. And
What's the
guess what they're gonna the difference is that the certified classroom teachers have passed the state certification test and have met the requirements needed to teach in the classroom, and they don't have to have anybody else.
Okay.
The
Okay.
substitute teachers now, per Illinois, and I know this is national radio, but per Illinois state law, substitute teachers do have to go through a form of training, but they do not have to pass the certification test for classroom teachers, which makes them highly qualified. A closer examination into what I am stating publicly will result in the public coming to terms, I should say, accepting or recognizing that there are inadequacies in how these schools are staffed. And that's also a problem.
We're talking with Dr. Sonia Whitaker. You got to get her book. Is there anybody who can teach me how to read? You got to, you because that's a real question that you need to ask, which goes to the point you just made. You need to inquire in your
Hmm.
district, in your child's school district, and at the school. Because maybe you need to ask the teacher. You need to find out if the teacher who's teaching your child, are they certified?
That part, yes, absolutely. Yes, correct.
Okay. How do you do? I mean, that's who do you ask? Because I mean,
The
because
principal,
okay,
the
because the
school
principal
principal.
does. What power does a principal have to get certain teachers in his or her school?
So when a parent, for example, if a parent finds out that my child's teacher is not certified, that he or she is working hard as best they can, but they're not a certified classroom teacher, a parent has the right to request that their child be placed in a classroom with certified teachers. Now,
Okay.
here's where advocacy comes. This is the advocacy that people aren't talking publicly about. Advocacy is if a principal says, which I've done that job too. I could say as a principal, Mr. and Mrs. So and so, I would like to place your child in another class with a certified teacher, but I don't have any certified teachers in other third grade certified teachers or sixth grade certified teachers. So there's no place else to go. Now, the advocacy at the higher level is now you're approaching district administration. Oh, I know there's some senior level officials like, is Dr. Whitaker saying this? Yes, only on the Santita Jackson show. The next level of advocacy is district level conversation about how are teachers being placed across the entire school district so that there is an adequate disbursement of certified classroom teachers from building to building so that what doesn't happen, which I've seen, you have one school where 50% of the teachers are certified and 50% of the teachers are substitute teachers. And then on the north side of town, you may have a school where 100% of the teachers are certified. Santita, this is like a whole thing in itself.
No, no, but you know what? I know we were going to be talking about something else, but you know what? You kind of have to go where the Lord leads you
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we don't know where the advocacy is. I'm accustomed to, and I have to give
or
a
should
shout.
be.
Well, I mean, I mean, Mrs. Anita Beard was head of the PTA at John J. Pershing School, where all five of us went to school there. My sister ended up finishing at Dr. Marva Collins School, which was a tremendous experience for her. But Mrs. Beard was so active with that PTA.
Hmm.
I mean, and the I remember going to one or two of the meetings, and they were packed. They were, and I'm accustomed to a very active PTA, and she was on top of the teachers, the resources getting to the students, and it was also one of the top, public grammar schools in the city. But
Hmm.
she didn't play, and those parents didn't play. They were also very educated people, but they were also they were people who were not afraid to raise their voices, because everybody was it was a middle class, very middle class and upper middle class community, but everybody was not. But all the parents were engaged, and Mrs. Beard made sure that all the parents were engaged. And I say that to say it's not about a PhD. It's You can have no D. What we're
Hmm.
doing today, and I'm going to have you come back on, Dr. Whitaker, so we can continue. I want us to have a rolling conversation about education. I think what we ended up doing today is showing people what they need to be looking for. Because you're Minneapolis, St. Paul, this is for you. This is for everybody who's listening to this show.
Yeah.
The questions you need to ask at your child's school, in the district, before you get downtown to the Board of Education.
Yeah.
There's an advocacy that there's a person, your first go-to person is the principal.
Hmm.
Because Dr. Whitaker, we don't even know. I mean, to me, certified substitute, and the thing that is so painful is that when you go to, say, the top tier public schools, right? The schools that are selective.
Hmm.
let alone prep schools. Prep schools, they've got to be you. They have to have masters and PhDs before you even think about teaching these folks kids. Am I
Hmm.
not right?
Correct.
That's why I'm saying for you, you could be doing something else, but what you've done is you've almost been like the spook who sat by the door.
Hmm.
You went into these other communities and you said, oh no, they're getting Apple computers. They're getting
Correct.
leather bags. No, they only have certified teachers here.
Correct.
And I'm saying if you're a substitute teacher and you need certification, then we need to be able to onboard you
Hmm.
into into an education program that will enable you to become a certified teacher. I'm not trying to say throw
Right.
them out, because if
Right. I
you want to
agree.
go into if you want to go into teaching, there might have been something that they didn't get. It doesn't mean that you're not able to get it. It means you didn't get it, and we can help you to get to become qualified. So I'm not trying to take push anybody out unless they really
Right.
shouldn't be in education, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But Dr. Whitaker, so how do we get this to? Because I think we need to tell this story to our parents as they're trying. I mean, as Linda McMahon,
Hmm.
who is the Secretary of Education, she's over a department that they're trying. They're not trying. That didn't he sign an executive order to get rid of it?
He signed an executive order that starts the process and
Okay.
sent letters to the heads of the state boards of educations, indicating that if they have any initiatives that align with DEI, that he was going to strip funding. It's my understanding that today he stripped $350 million worth of funding. I wasn't able to figure out from where yet because I needed to get on with you, but he's
Mhm.
moving even as we speak.
But and so understanding that, this is why we have to teach our parents about advocacy. And before we continue,
Correct.
I've got to say happy birthday to you, Solomon. Happy birthday, Solomon. Sending you so much love. And Mildred, happy birthday to your beautiful niece, Janiyah Cummings. Sending you so much love. You all didn't think I was watching, but I was. But I want everybody here to understand what. Hey, Carol, how you doing, sweetie? And Mildred, I want you all to know, Solomon, the kind of the advocacy
Right.
in which you must engage, because we're not powerless, Dr. Whitaker. I think that's what you're trying to tell.
Correct. Right. Right. We have to be informed about where to go to advocate and for what. Because regardless of, and I look forward to continuing to talk about this
Mhm.
movement at the U.S. Department of Education level, but regardless of what happens there, public education for quite a while is here to stay. And so we
Mhm.
still have to fight and fight even harder than ever before to make sure that our children are being served by the most qualified educators. Even in the middle of that, because my concern is that we
Mhm.
become so distracted by this political debate
Mhm.
that we forget to continue to advocate on the ground level for our individual children as well.
So, what do you advise that we do now? Because $350 million have been stripped, and clearly our teachers are going to be monitored. I don't know
Hmm.
what that
Hmm.
means. I
Hmm.
don't know what Teach for America is going to mean at this time. When you've
Hmm.
got a lot of young white teachers who are well meaning, um, but there's a cultural disconnect,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
When black and brown children, particularly black children, are at least 6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled from school. This is a real problem. And when you start draining the resources out of schools,
Hmm. Hmm.
Dr. Whitaker, we're in a computer age. How can you send a child to school without a computer? That's like sending children to school without books. Today,
Exactly. Exactly. And they can't access the content.
so, okay, well, let's back up. When you see the new U.S. Secretary of Education,
Mm.
help me to assess who she is. As you, Dr. Whitaker, established, nationally renowned educator,
Yes.
when you see her as an educator, someone who doesn't have a background in education, who doesn't understand, methodologies,
Right.
I just there's so much
I
that she doesn't understand, and she's talking, and but she comes in and tells you what you're not doing correctly.
exactly. I would say, I would speak for most, not all, I'm certain, but most educators at my level, leaders at my level in education would say they were highly offended by the fact that someone who is a non-educator could not only take the post, but could take the post and then be positioned to demolish public education in its entirety is offensive to say the least. And you have to keep in mind too that not only has she taken the post and made these decisions, are in the process of having the role of carrying out those decision makings, but she hasn't spoken with educators. She hasn't spoken with school district officials in a way in some of the neediest districts to find out how to best serve those students. So, I'll go back until it's proven otherwise and state that this is a deliberate and malicious attempt to ensure that Black and brown children and children experiencing the impact of poverty, which include white children, are
Hmm.
not literate, that they remain a part of our nation's literacy crisis, and that they don't gain the skills and capabilities they need to experience wealth, to live and to support their families.
Because this is a problem for poor white children. I mean, for everybody. Because when you look at the
Right.
state of, I mean, the standard of living in Appalachia and in poor white
Hmm.
areas,
Hmm.
white people aren't doing well. I mean, Americans
Right.
aren't doing well.
Right.
So let us look at, excuse me, you had an experience this weekend because
Mhm.
DEI now they're going after DEI in public
Hmm.
education. And
Correct.
and I say this as we're talking during Black History Month, when we think about Dr. Carter G. Woodson, certainly one of the first blacks to get a PhD from the University of Chicago, brilliant man who came out of slavery, who said, I don't want Black history, I want to find Blacks in history.
Yeah.
Because what he saw was that Blacks had been excluded from history. Let's be very clear, because I think we have a misunderstanding, and certainly it's not been explained properly what Black History Month is about. It's not about the first black this, the first black that. Black people have been doing everything. First of all, we gave you all the books.
Hmm.
Rome got their books from Africa. Egypt is Africa. I don't care how the Europeans in Egypt try to position themselves as being other than black people. That's what they are. The original Egyptians, that's what they are. All these universities, these systems will come straight out of Africa, everybody. So I'm trying to find out, just help me, uh, Dr. Whitaker, just what, when we talk about, and I know I might lose my job as a teacher if I said that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because as you've
Not
indicated,
might, I would. I lose my
yeah,
job.
yeah, yeah. And in some states, it has been against the law to incorporate knowledge of students' culture into instruction or to engage in what is referred to as professional development centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion. There have been states where teachers prior to this administration would lose their tenure. What I'm experiencing, and I have the great benefit of working at all levels of the system, but Santita, as you know, I'm still in front of classroom teachers,
Yeah.
and I'm still in front of white classroom teachers who are saying to me, Doc, I got into the teaching profession because I just wanted to do right by all children. I wanted to be a teacher and not a politician, but they're finding that politics have made its way into their classrooms. And so, what I am doing these days, even with all of these going on, is providing training and talking with educators about how to be effective deliverers of instruction. And so, the what I'm saying now to them, Samtita, is regardless, DEI is one form of terminology. I don't mean to downplay that because it's very legit. But the
Mhm.
bottom line is that teachers who have to teach, what I am saying to them is regardless of the terminology that you use, if you're going to cause for statistically significant improvements in the performance levels of Black children, brown children, and children experiencing impact of poverty, you've got to know who they are culturally,
Mhm.
and you have got to expose them to materials that would suggest that they're intellectually capable of achieving at high levels. You've got to expose them to materials to include books that share information related to the contributions that people that look like them have made to society. Because it is then and only then will students make the types of curricular connections that they need to make to develop the resiliency that they need to have in order to get through some of those hard mathematical concepts, scientific concepts, high levels of reading comprehensions that they have to produce. If we are not exposing them, if we are stripping students away from materials that would suggest that they are of any value, then you automatically decrease the likelihood that they're going to be successful academically, which is why I continue to state that doing away with DEI related initiatives, which includes professional development for teachers related to race relations, related to culturally responsive teaching, as well as the doing away with curriculum materials and books that tell of America's history in a way that increases all students' knowledge, not just Black students' knowledge, not just brown students' knowledge, but that increases their knowledge so that we can have a sense of unity about one, what we've been through, two, develop resiliency because we know that we've gotten through a lot, but then also the willingness to continue to fight the good fight. There
Yeah.
are people in our society in high places, it's like good versus evil, that don't
Mhm.
want that for our country, that
And
don't
for,
want that for our educators.
but no, but let me ask you this, because you had an interesting weekend
Hmm.
where you were leading seminars, right?
Yeah, so
And
right. So as
what
a
do you
Black,
think?
and so I had the honor, again, Black educator standing in front of mostly white teachers, leading several seminars back to back to back around culturally responsive teaching. Some would say DEI related initiatives. Our focus, first of all, it was interesting because many of them were saying to me, how do I teach now? I care about my white students, I care about my Black students, my Asian students, my Latino students, students whose native language is other than English. I care about them. So how do I provide them? This is what they're saying to me, a great
Mhm.
academic experience while also addressing their social and emotional needs during this time in American society. And the first thing that I said to them, I mean, this was like they were waiting for weeks to be able to say that to someone. And the first
Mhm.
thing I said to them is, we have to go back to what good teaching is. And good teaching is not just teaching from a Eurocentric perspective. Good teaching is not just providing students with access to materials that would suggest that white people are superior and Black people are inferior. That is not good teaching. And so let's get back to what good teaching is. Some don't like when we use the term inclusive. The reality is that regardless of the student's background, if they don't feel that they have a place in the building, they have a
Mhm.
place in the classroom, a place in the curriculum, then you cannot teach them. So the strategy that I used in my session just this past week and will continue to use is to take teachers back to what is it going to take to make sure that you know enough about the cultural backgrounds and experiences that include experiences historically with oppression and its impact on them psychologically and emotionally. You got to understand that so that you can be effective in your delivery of instruction to them, your assessment of their intellectual capabilities, because if you have a brain, you have a bias, and that includes all of us. So there's no way to be an effective teacher without having an opportunity to come to terms with cultural biases that will serve as counterproductive to supporting you and doing your work.
But how do you even give that instruction in this current environment? And clearly, people want that because
You're
you know,
asking for
I
it.
knew some. They're asking for it, and I actually know someone. I found out. I know someone who was at one of your seminars.
Oh, wow.
Wow. And it was life changing for her. I
Mhm.
did. You never, ever know. I had a friend I was talking to, a friend who is a teacher, and she was
Mhm.
lamenting the fact that she was not at this particular event because she had something else that she had to do, or a funeral. And she mentioned this seminar. I said, "Well, wait a minute, who was leading it?" And it turns out it was you.
Oh, wow, that's deep.
And but no, because the thing is, she said it is. She said it is frustrating, and she said, and it is frightening
Mhm.
because we don't know what to do now. You
Mhm.
don't know what to say. There is a chill that is settled in now because these are teachers who are now seeing the Department of Education that's being dismantled. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering how that's impacting teachers because to me that's so
Mhm.
diminishing. We would never diminish Wall Street,
Mhm. Mhm.
or
And
LaSalle
and
Street, you know.
And also, in terms of its direct impact on teachers, the federal funds, particularly the Title I funds, those are a part of the funds that are being threatened to have been taken away
What's Title
from
One?
school. Title I is the funds that come that are distributed out of the U.S. Department of Education and targeted at school districts serving majority students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. So, for your listening audience, when you hear things like are statements and laws that would suggest that if school districts are found to have implemented DEI related initiatives, they are going to be stripped of the federal funds. That's a code word for saying the greater majority of the funds that these school districts need to feed children, to offer after school programs for students, to offer remediation programs and enrichment programs, those funds would be stripped. That's what they're referring to. And it's important to recognize, too, because of states like the state of Illinois, and many states across our country that rely heavily on property taxes for school funding. That means that those of us serving in school district where greater majority of the students qualify for free and reduced lunch, that means that we rely heavily on the Title I funds and the like to provide high quality experiences for students. Without that, these schools won't survive. They won't survive.
But isn't that the point? They don't
And
want to
that's
survive.
deliberate and that's intentional. That's strategic. That's institutional.
But don't we need to let people know that the
Absolutely.
student? I mean, the students, Johnny, Janiqua, Jane,
Hmm.
and Jose and Maria and Billy Bob and Bobby Sue, all these kids, they can all learn. They're not being taught, and it's not that the teachers can't. The teachers are being hamstrung,
Hmm.
and they're not being given the resources, and they're being disrespected, quite frankly, by the Department of Education.
Right.
Because
And you know how I think we do a good job of giving your audience what to look for and what to advocate for. And so the first one that we gave is we talked about finding out how many teachers in your child's schools are actually certified. So this would be the second one. The second one would be to find out from your child's teachers, administrators, and district level officials if the federal funds are stripped from your system, what goes away? What goes away? I want every parent in every school district across the United States of America in the next 48 hours to know the answer to the question, what is my child getting access today, that my child will not have access to if the federal funds that are channeled toward our schools and district go away? That's advocacy. If parents don't know the answer to that question in the next 48 hours, I'm going to be very concerned because
well,
you
the
got
thing
to
is,
know what you're fighting for.
but we don't know. That's the thing. That's why just knowing who the teachers, who's certified,
Hmm.
who's not. I mean, what's the difference between a certified teacher and a substitute teacher? What is I mean, will your state Department of Education still exist?
Exactly.
When
Yeah.
these
How
funds,
does this decision impact our State Department? How
I
does it
mean, how will
impact our
this
school district?
how's this supposed to work? I mean, because where's the
Mhm.
money supposed to come from, Dr. Whitaker, to run
And
this?
I'll tell you part of the problem that my school district officials are reporting to me. They're saying, Doc, the decisions are being made so fast, they don't even have enough time to respond to the how does this impact. At best, they can predict, so they could produce a document that would suggest that, but the rules are changing so fast. I had the honor, I don't know if I told you, I was on Capitol Hill just 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago. I was in Washington, D.C. And in fact, I don't think I told you this, the day that, along these lines, the day that I was on Capitol Hill visiting with several of our Congress folks, what literally while I was there, staffers were running out of their offices saying that literally right now an executive order is being signed to do away with the U.S. Department of Education. Now, I'm an educator. I've been a teacher, principal, assistant principal, as you said, superintendent, assistant soup. I'm on Capitol Hill advocating, and literally, as I am sitting in offices, the staffers and the Congress, members of Congress, are getting notice as we are talking that an executive order has been signed to do away with the U.S. Department of Education. While I'm sitting there, Santita, I didn't tell you that.
While you're trying to talk about it.
In DC, while I'm talking about it, I saw
But you know what?
staffers with tears in their eyes. These are staffers I've seen for years that I never
But you
saw
know what?
react that way. It's like they didn't physically even know which direction to go
But
in.
you know what? You know what? This is what we have to learn. You know, Chauncey Brown, Pastor Chan, how are you doing? You're saying, Dr.
Hi, Chauncey
Whitaker,
Bell.
right? You're insightful. I've had
Thank
so
you.
Solomon said you're brilliant, and that is absolutely
Oh,
true.
nice.
And Robert Williams, Shalom, is saying facts because people don't
Thank you.
know, they don't have the information. And that's why I think
No,
at the Push Saturday morning meetings, we have to have a carve out on education, even if it's just 5 minutes, where you
I
say,
agree.
check every check, because we used to do it every week. What this is what you need to do. You need to go to your child's school, and you have to say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have to say your prayers every day. You
Mm-hmm.
have to say, "I am somebody," every day. You need to know here every week what you need to be asking in the
Yeah.
school system, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't. I certainly didn't know. Well, I always had certified teachers when I think about it, because
Mm-hmm.
these were great teachers, um, and everybody deserves that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
our kids don't have that. And I'm
Not
just
all of
trying to.
them.
I only have about 5 minutes left here, but you're gonna come back next week,
Okay.
because because we have to do this routinely. Like, I have someone who's going to be coming on talking about reparations. I have someone else who's going to be talking about labor issues. We're going to start doing that, because the only way that we're going to get through this period, Dr. Whitaker, is to organize.
Yeah.
And you have to inform people, because marching everybody, I think it's important. But first you have the investigation and you have the education
Mm-hmm.
before you get to the demonstration. That's way down the road. We're reacting too
Right.
late. These people are planning. They were planning to take.
Very strategic.
They're very strategic. I mean, look, they were getting rid of. They were overturning the Brown v. Board of Education decision as soon as it went down.
Mm-hmm.
It took them 20 years to get to Bakke, but they got there. The Bakke decision tore up affirmative action, and they have been on a steady drumbeat to repeal every advance we've made. Dr. Mary Frances Berry was tasked by President Jimmy Carter with creating the Department of Education. She's the first African American to head a private, I mean, excuse me, a PWI, a predominantly white institution in America. She was the provost at the University of Colorado at Denver. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant woman. And this was not her idea. But what happens in all of these departments, there's a lot of graft. A lot of people get contracts, blah, blah, blah. But they still have the Pentagon. Pentagon has failed 7 consecutive audits. Nobody's trying to dismantle it. Although the president, I will give him credit, he's trying to cut that military budget. And we need to, because we can't afford it. I just want all that money that, I tell you what, Elon Musk ain't getting cut, and we need to look at that. I'm saying it, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
So these last 3 minutes belong to you because you'll be back next week because we're going to continue to educate. What do you want to say before we go?
I want to say, whatever you do, don't go to sleep.
Okay.
Don't go to sleep at the wheel. And the best way to make sure that that doesn't happen is to stay informed. If you have never been informed before, it is more important now than ever before that you are informed. Particularly, I love Miss Jackson. I love your focus on education,
Yeah.
particularly as it relates to the education of your children and your children's children, because it is being attacked. Because that everybody knows that educate to be educated is to be free.
Oh, you know what? I want to thank you for all that you've done and for all that you continue to do.
Mm,
That's why,
thank you.
with the information that you've given us today, you got to come back and we're going to do this. We're just going to do this routinely because you need to know what you need to be asking for. I mean, we will have yet another conversation on what losing the Department of Education will mean. But we've got a Department of Education and we still don't know how to use it.
Hmm.
We've got resources at our disposal. We need to know if they're going to strip the money, we need to know what we need our money allocated for, and we need to demand
Right.
that no, we need some teachers here. And I don't want you to throw out the substitute teachers. I
No.
want you to support them so that they can be certified. Because if they've shown an inclination to go into education, I support that.
Yeah, I agree with
Okay,
that.
I
Yeah.
support that. What you might need, what you need are reinforcements, and we need to give you that. If we can do that for everybody else, the Pentagon, everybody failed its audit, Dr. Whitaker, 7 consecutive years.
Hmm.
If you want to start with waste, you don't need to start with USAID. You need to start there. You need to start there. And what America has to have a mind to do is to educate people. How about that part?
Absolutely.
When you decide that you want to educate people and not just train them, huh? See, educated people get governed. Trained people get managed.
Mm.
Trained people aren't in democracies. They're not in republics. Think about that. Think about that, everybody. The brilliant Dr. Sonia Whitaker, push
Thank
Excel, and
you.
of course, you got to get the book. And it asks the very simple question. Please lift it up for us so we can see it.
Where'd it go?
Is there anybody who can teach me how to read? And yes,
That's good.
yes, they do exist. And we thank God for this woman. She's
Thank you.
more beautiful on the inside than she is on the outside, if that is
Oh,
possible. And we thank God for you. Can't wait to have you back next week. We've got a
I'm
lot to
looking
talk
forward
about.
to it. Yep.
Absolutely. Sending you so much love. Dr. Sonia Whitaker, everybody. Get the book. Get the book.
Peace.
You need it. Peace and
Thank you.
love. God
All
bless
right.
you.
Peace and love.
And everybody, let's talk about
I'm gonna take this
denuclearization.
picture.
Hey, denuclearization in the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Let's talk about it with Medea Benjamin of Code Pink and Mike Ferner of Veterans for Peace and Worlds Without War, David Swanson. We got a lot to talk about, so let's get to it, everybody. Sending you
Nice.
much love here on AM
That's a
950 Radio.
girl.
The voice of progressive medicine. I hope it's a nice girl. I need to put
That's a
this
good
comb in
one.
my hair. AM
That's a good
950
one.
Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.
Bye.
God bless.